We live in a world where much of humanity has lost its hunger for the stars. Once, the night sky was seen as a symbol of endless possibilities, a final frontier just waiting to be conquered. In many ways, it still is. But somewhere along the way, the people lost interest. Once, Americans cheered as President Kennedy promised that the United States would reach the moon within the decade. And when Neil Armstrong planted the American flag there in 1969, the nation declared victory. They could declare themselves victorious, and so they walked away to other battlefields. Reaching other planets was deemed too expensive, too ambitious. But what if history had taken a slightly different turn? What if the Soviet Union had reached the moon first? What if that victory had spurred the United States onwards, pushing both superpowers to continue reaching for the stars? On January the 14th, 1966, Chief Engineer Sergei Korolev, the brilliant mind behind the Soviet space program, undergoes routine surgery. In our world, complications from the surgery claimed his life, effectively ruining the Soviet chances of reaching the moon. But imagine instead, he emerges from his surgery feeling better a few hours later. He is exhausted and his doctors beg him to rest, but instead he rushes to the lab. He has a new idea for a rocket, an idea that might just get his cosmonauts to the moon. He is fond of his N-1 design, but he understands that 30 engines is an engineering nightmare. What his Soviet Union needs is power, not quantity. Korolev begins to work tirelessly to design a simpler, more efficient rocket. 2 years later, in January of 1968, the world is collectively holding its breath, watching in awe as a Soviet rocket lands safely on the lunar surface. Alexei Leonov, a celebrated cosmonaut, emerges, the first ever person to set foot on the moon. He plants a Soviet flag and utters words that will echo through human history. This is a step I walk for the Soviet Union and for all of humanity, that we may all someday explore beyond the Earth. Across the globe, television stations broadcast the triumphant image, the red Soviet flag standing proudly in the low gravity of the moon. President Lyndon B. Johnson watches with his chief advisors in the Oval Office, his jaw clenched. America has been beaten to the moon, and the Soviets are doing an excellent job of capitalizing on the propaganda. Johnson understands that the US cannot afford to cede the victory of the space race to the Soviets. They have lost out on reaching the moon first, so they must find another fight among the stars that they can win. He convenes an emergency meeting with NASA officials and military advisors, demanding a new target. He wants a plan drawn up that will allow the US to send a manned mission to Mars by 1980. In a speech that will go down as one of the most famous in American history, Johnson vows, "We shall never give up." The announcement electrifies the nation and helps him secure re-election over Nixon in November. He has been granted a clear mandate from the American people to reach Mars. However, there is a bit of a problem, and that is acquiring the funding for such a bold project. Johnson hopes to arrange the money from an unlikely location: Vietnam. Meanwhile, Khrushchev is elated by the Russian success in reaching the moon. He pushes for plans for creating a moon base to be drawn up, so that he can capitalize on the gains that Korolev has made for the Soviet Union's world image. The Soviets develop a plan to set a permanent base on the moon by 1975. Over the next year, Johnson's Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, quietly works to negotiate a peace deal with North Vietnam. The talks are painstaking and fraught with mistrust, but Johnson is willing to be extremely pragmatic. He offers North Vietnam incredibly generous terms, allowing them to unify the country after a 90-day withdrawal period for American forces and South Vietnamese allies. South Vietnam's government is furious, but Johnson is unmoved. He believes that this is the only path forward to a position where the United States has the resources available to reach Mars by 1980. The peace accord is signed in early 1969, one of the first acts of Johnson's second term. the American populace spontaneously celebrate as people realize that the axe of Vietnam is no longer hanging over their heads. Johnson is free to funnel unprecedented funds into NASA, and American scientists begin to furiously work to discover how to send a manned mission to Mars. In 1971, the Apollo program finally places an American on the moon. Buzz Aldrin, planting the stars and stripes beside the Soviet flag, declares that the two nations are working side by side, hand in hand, to open space for the world. Few believe him. The space race was still about who could reach the next goal first, and the Soviets are ahead. In 1976, they are able to unveil Zvezda, a permanent lunar base. The Zvezda base is lauded around the world as a marvel of Soviet engineering. Its domed habitats, shielded from radiation, house laboratories, living quarters for up to 11 cosmonauts, and even a small greenhouse where cosmonauts attempt to grow wheat and potatoes. Cameras record their daily lives, broadcasting a mix of scientific breakthroughs and mundane routines to an enraptured audience on Earth. The cosmonauts quickly become celebrities, and Zvezda's broadcasts take a TV reality show edge. People from around the world donate for the cosmonauts' favorite foods to be adapted for space, while President Humphrey watches with gritted teeth. He takes to calling NASA periodically to ask, "Where's our moon base?" He views Zvezda as a threat, despite the fact that there are no weapons at the base. But he cannot afford to let the Soviets dominate the moon. NASA frantically accelerates its own lunar base program, and by 1978, the United States has established a permanent lunar base, Apollo. While the countries continue to fight, the astronauts and cosmonauts on the moon begin to get to know one another, and even collaborate on ideas occasionally. A quiet feeling of camaraderie emerges. Apollo broadcasts also become extremely popular viewing, and the United States starts to look into settling more people on the moon. A plan is created to build a factory there that will turn lunar dust into bricks, making buildings possible. But in the meantime, the true American triumph comes in 1982, when the Americans finally beat the Soviets for the first time in a space race objective. They reach Mars first. It took years on rocket prototypes and cost millions of dollars. But finally, America has proven itself against its rivals. Astronaut John W. Young becomes the first human to set foot on another planet as the world watches breathlessly. His words are broadcast to millions as he promises, "This is just the beginning. America will never stop reaching for the stars." The victory is a moment of catharsis for a nation that has felt eclipsed in space since Sputnik was launched by the Soviets in 1957. President Humphrey hails the moment as proof of American ingenuity and resilience. For a brief shining moment, the Soviets and Americans feel destined to claim the stars. Settlements on the moon, permanent bases on Mars, they all feel like real possibilities. Plans are formalized for that brick factory on the moon, and ideas are pitched for permanent bases on Mars. But alas, it is not to be. As Americans begin to feel they have won the space race, the government finds other places to put their money, and pulls away from NASA's dream of a permanent base on Mars. NASA is also forced to accept that the government is not yet ready to support building a real city on the moon. However, the bases on the moon are still functioning quite well. Zvezda and Apollo both evolve into international science hubs. Joint missions are still rare, but become more common over time, with scientists collaborating on projects ranging from mining lunar ice for water, to testing technology for deep space exploration, to determining all the potential uses for lunar dust. Technological advances also arise from the space race. The need for lightweight materials and efficient energy sources leads to breakthroughs in solar power and battery storage. Medical research is conducted in microgravity, and new treatments for osteoporosis and muscle atrophy come about as a result. History did not go in this direction. After America won the moon race, they focused on other projects closer to home. The Soviets did as well. Without competition as a motivator, the stars receded into the background, becoming a secondary priority. The Americans and Soviets were more interested in fighting each other through proxy wars on Earth than in reaching Mars or building on the Moon. Yet the legacy of the space race still endures in our timeline. And though humanity did not go as far as it might have, America did reach the stars, and men did walk on the Moon. Who knows? We may do so again soon. What other what-ifs in history would you like to explore? Comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe.